and welcome. I'm Mark Morgan, and this is the Egyptian Magick podcast. And today's topic, bit of a mouthful, is Cosmologies of Ancient Egypt. So I hope I can kind of break that down and make that quite attractive. If you've had a chance talk with Cosmology, kind of for some reason, I've been watching this kind of rather good comedy series on the TV called Big Bang, which has this kind of quite attractive theme tune. And I was looking at the lyrics of that because I thought it's obviously about cosmology, so I'm not going to try and sing it, but the first line, which you probably know by heart if you know the series, it says, "Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state. Then nearly 40 billion years ago, expansion started. Wait. The Earth began to cool, the autotrophs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built a wall and we built the pyramids. Math, science, history, unveiling the mysteries that all started with the Big Bang." So there you go. That's a cosmology, basically, one way or another. The only bit that's not really, obviously, I like the bit where it kind of mentions the pyramids as being a kind of milestone in the human cosmology. Autotrophs. I had to look at what an autotroph was. But again, that's a step in our development of these entity organisms that convert organic matter into another form that other kind of entities and creatures would be able to eat. So it's a kind of a bridge between one stage of creation and the other. Anyway, so there's cosmology. And usually cosmology is defined as the science of the origin and development of the universe. Modern cosmology, which is quite sort of noticeable, is dominated by the Big Bang theory, funny enough, which brings together kind of astronomy, stuff that they can see in astronomy, and something to do with particle physics. So the two together kind of observations lead to this kind of idea of that the whole thing started with a Big Bang, hence the lyrics of the popular TV comedy. Cosmology, as I say, is an aspect of modern science that I suppose you could say most overlaps with the interests of with our own interests in our distant ancestors. Cosmology, often the theories of cosmology, even like the Big Bang, or the steady state as the alternative to that, often has a precursor in the in ancient philosophy and speculation, and funny enough, in physics they often use a lot of concepts and terms that come from very, very old pieces of philosophy. Even the term atom, I think, is probably from Greek, and you also get that within Indian stuff. Anyway, in a nutshell, then, as we're mostly focusing on the cosmology of Egypt, you could say in a nutshell what I'm going to kind of argue and go around the bushes and come back to is it breaks down to two principles, which is one male and one female. And this, whether that's human male and female, or in a sense, as a metaphor, the male and the female used as a metaphor for actually the creation of the whole universe. That's quite a common ancient kind of cosmology, really, one way or another. Beyond that kind of duality, that metaphor of the male and female, because it essentially is a metaphor, because it's applied to all sorts of things that are not even human. You might have a sort of singular monad meaning a singular thing, but even that usually turns out to be some sort of combination of these two breakaway elements, the male and the female. As I say, it might be surprising to think that this is what you find in Egypt, but I think I can argue for that. Perhaps you would say this is a kind of common ancient view across all sorts of different philosophies. The most well-known, of course, would be from India, where in their cosmology you have everything, all the matter in the universe breaks down in the end to a Purusha, which probably just means a person or a male person usually, and then a kind of, which is like also a spiritual thing, and a kind of female substance called Prakriti, which is also like the earth. And later times, the same sort of ideas, they get picked up by everybody and they all put their own spin on it. So in, say, something like Tantra, it would boil down to Shiva Shakti as the two fundamental principles. Shiva Shakti being a male and a female practitioner or entities, but it's applied to all sorts of non-human things as falling into one category or another. And again, you might have a male-female pair as some sort of intermediary or precursor of the both. This all fits, of course, with my own promulgation of the idea of a tantric interpretation of Egyptian culture. Or really what I'm saying is that you can identify certain cultures as being kind of tantric, inverted commas. And Egypt is one of those that could be viewed as a tantric, inverted commas, one in which the philosophy of the body and the human body plays this major role in classifying everything else within that system. And that's the way cosmologies tend to work. I guess that might be a kind of novel view, as in not from a novel, but sort of new. Not unusual, perhaps controversial, I would have thought. Before we get to that, I best go through the kind of usual context and some of the theories that you would find within the kind of Egyptian view primarily. So it's an activity that cosmology, the writing of cosmology or the speculation on cosmology, that we as a species are very fond of. You have to say that this is theoretical thought. This is early philosophy, really, because there's no way we could ever have observed as humans these very, very remote events, and they're usually thought of as very, very remote events in time. It always has to be a bit speculative, based on a little bit of evidence of the sort of thing that you get in the Big Bang. That's based on a little bit of evidence of what they can find in the universe. But the evidence in the Egyptian thing would be deductions from the remnants of previous creations or extinct species that they find around them. And that's a very interesting feature of Egyptian thought, that they were definitely observing things like geology, even fossils, even collecting fossils, even using the fossils as a kind of hieroglyph in some ways to depict something that's very, very old. And that's a kind of another interesting. So there's a certain amount of observation, and then there's a look at things like patterns they might perceive in nature, and primarily from the observation of their own bodies, which is like, again, brings us back to this tantric idea. They look at the process of how their body works, and especially how how reproduction works and how kind of birth and development and things in the womb, how that comes about. And from that kind of model, that observation, they make certain extrapolations to the kind of the macro, what we call the macrocosm, the whole system. As I say, geology also plays a role in that. So you have to remember that when reading the Egyptian accounts of what they call the origin of their universe, one has to remember when reading the Egyptian accounts of the origin of the universe, whatever we might think, they never said that these were speculations, of course, because people don't. But they were obviously the speculations of quite well-educated people, probably members of specialist philosophical, magical groups, if you like, the mystery cults, and also well-educated priests, which wouldn't have been all of them. And they obviously spent a certain amount of time speculating on these ideas. You can tell that when you look at the kind of examples that they're not really based on observations, or not all of them. There's certain bits of them that look very, very theoretical. A kind of proto-Kabbalah or number symbolism seems to be at work in a lot of these speculations. And why would that those speculations be anything other than what they are? But of course, they're based on number. So this is what's interesting to me, and should be interesting to everybody, is this is a kind of abstract thought. This is a philosophy. And the Egyptians are not supposed to have that kind of thing going on. They're supposed to, you sometimes read in books about the Egyptians that they were very literal and they didn't really make abstractions and stuff. So when they represented the sky as being a cow standing on four legs, they kind of actually thought of it that way, which I think is a fairly preposterous view of the Egyptians. I think they obviously knew it wasn't that. These are abstractions. They speculated on all sorts of things, including the ultimate abstractions from our point of view, which is space and time. Anyway, I should mention, of course, that I call this episode Cosmologies of Ancient Egypt. And that's because you're not going to find really one unified view. You'll find a certain amount of common ground, but I mean, I think that's one of the attractive things about the Egyptian corpus of ideas, is that it's almost like everybody had a go at it. You know, everybody kind of at some point could sort of work out what bit they liked. And so you get, obviously the books, when you go into print, they tend to focus on one or two kind of very, very popular examples from cosmology. And maybe that distorts the fact that actually there are some views when they kind of see competing views, parallel views. There are quite a lot of alternative views within the Egyptian system itself. And personally, I think the fact that something is so diverse and there are so many competing views and there isn't one doctrinal view that everybody has to accept, we should welcome that. That's actually quite an attractive feature in a culture, even if it does make finding getting a picture of the whole sometimes a bit harder because of the contradictions between the two different systems, and because there are so many interesting views of this moment of when the world came into existence. So that's why I say cosmologies rather than cosmology singular. I know that in modern life we're trained to think that a kind of monolithic view, a singular view, is somehow better than someone who has kind of lots of different views at the same time, or a society that has contradictions. But I don't know. I kind of think we should get over that. Really, I think it's quite good. It's probably better that a society that is not too monolithic. As I argued in the earlier lecture number, episode 57, I've given it a number now, on duality and plurality. It should really be viewed as a better way of looking at the universe, more mature. I remember when I was kind of learning this sort of stuff, that our teacher, I was on Hinduism, in fact, when I was studying that, which was another kind of big interest of mine. I was told that, our universe is actually quite complicated. We know that. It's prolix. It goes on and on all over the place. Why would a view that reduces everything to a few basic principles, why is that so attractive? Why do we think that's so good? Whereas, say, for instance, Hinduism, which has hundreds and hundreds of deities, a bit like Egypt as well. Well, the world is complicated. Why wouldn't your cosmology and certainly some aspects of it your classification be quite complicated as well? The most glaring example that's pointed out within Hindu theology is some of the ideas that you find in Christianity, certain sects of it, not all Christians, but some, who view the oldest principle, the creator, if you like, the first mover, as an older male god with a beard, which we got used to. We see these depictions of God being this old guy. But the Hindu theologians ask, well, how can that that male principle, which doesn't even represent all of the male side of the universe, or how can that represent all that there is in as a creator? How can everything that exists come from something that's so partial that when they, for a start, very glaringly obvious, they've omitted half of creation, which is the, want to word, the female side. So that would be the argument of why the kind of plurality and complexity is actually a better way of looking at things once you get used to it. All right, so going back to the Egyptian cosmos and whatever, one of the interesting things when we get into the kind of patterns is that they tell us that it's a kind of on a cycle, it's a cyclical pattern. Or certainly I would deduce that from the fact that it tells us that there have been previous worlds, if you like. The world has existed before. Now, usually people don't think about that. I think once you get into the idea of previous existence, it's obviously alluding to the fact of some sort of cycle of creation and destruction, or evolution and involution in some way would be the most obvious thing. Again, that's not particularly known, but to give you an interesting text, there's a text I've mentioned it before. I won't go into it too much now, and it says that before time, so before the existence of time, everything was water, and in that time, there were 4 generations of, it says, disorganized gods that existed before the god Shu, who's not a disorganized god, raised the sky and enabled the sun god Ra to shine forth. So there you go. There were 4 generations now, which is again a very interesting coincidence that a lot of these very old cosmological systems seem to always break down to 4 different sort of cycles, if you like, over very, very long periods of time. Usually in the Hindu one, it's vast periods of time called yugas, and sometimes there's a kind of idea they all go downhill. So there's the 4-fold thing. You find that in other belief systems as well, that we've had 4 go so far, which, if you take the Hindu view that these vast areas of time, then that there probably is only time for 4 of these cycles to have happened since the Big Bang, in a way, or certainly since the kind of geological timeline that we look at, where when we presume that anything before that, we would have been kind of just a lump of molten rock or whatever. So it's a cyclical view, which is a bit like the Hindu cosmos, which develops and reaches a state of ultimate entropy, if you like. Eventually it runs out of energy and becomes sort of, I suppose you could say, equipoised or balanced or just silent in some ways, because it's over a vast period of time it reaches some sort of, as ripples in a pond or whatever. Eventually it all settles down again, and that's the point. We get all these kind of, all the elements are kind of not really doing very much, and then something sets it off again on its and that's usually sort of modeled as someone throwing a stone into that kind of watery abyss, and that kind of sets out cycles again, which starts things combining and chain reactions. So that could be, I think that fits with the idea of the Big Bang as well, right? That's sort of a moment in a very, very long cycle, or perhaps the steady state as well, where you have these interplay between sort of chaos and entropy and kind of activity. So as I say, the primeval world that it's talking about, going right back, these are the speculations. There would be just two entities in existence, which are modeled, or the metaphor is that they used was male and female, or in fact not human male and female necessarily. They were said to be watery and serpentine, so some sort of serpentine creature living in these primeval chaotic waters. This is known as the Noon, which has a kind of female or counterpoint serpent as well. Now that sort of model of a watery beginning and the serpents and all the rest, research shows, my research does anyway, that and other people's research that I borrow is that a lot of this owes quite a lot to meditations on gynecology at the womb and to sexuality, which of course is very mixed up with water and development and all the rest. Other cosmologies that we know about appear to make the same sort of move. As I say, the Egyptian, which begins with, sometimes it says with a single principle, which on the face of it may appear to be male, not necessarily human, but but again, when you kind of unpack it and look at it, you always find even entities that are kind of nominally male, such as the creator god Atum or Tem or Tum, always has female attributes or is secretly accompanied by a kind of counterpoint, a female counterpart. Tem or Atom as well is another abstraction in a way, another speculation from the priests. I don't think there's any ancient archaeology to back this up. It seems to be a priestly speculation, and the same role as this sort of demiurgus creator is you can substitute other entities and supernatural entities with an Egyptian system for this role as well. Thus you have that kind of very early speculation of 8 pairs of deities, again kind of male and female, of divine entities. I think in there, as you probably guess, of say for instance Amun. Amun sort of seems to play this role that the god Atum. There were similar names, confusing, I know, in other mythologies. Amun, and originally Amun was one of a pair, Amun and Amunet, which is just to add the female sort of suffix to the kind of the name of our moon to make it just again as an abstraction, really, to make it female. That would be from the famous system of Hermopolis, which is which means the town of the eight. This is one of the common cosmologies that occurs in written books, modern books about Egypt and all the rest that comes up. And you might have expected me to kind of just list these sort of things, but being the way I am, I kind of found something else really, and I thought I'd kind of go with that. But even that, you can see when I talked about the two basic building blocks of that, which are kind of male and female, and the or plus and minus, if you like. Hermopolis, or the town of the eight, was the sacred center also of the god Thoth, or Tahuti, who you either think of as accompanying the eight or originates them, or in some sense they're all said to be the soul of Thoth. He's the kind of collective. Is the eight considered as a collective thing, which is a kind of interesting definition of such an important god like Thoth. So there could be 9 if you like. As I say, these are quite abstract principles again, right, rather than archaeological principles or observational things. That this is speculation, very, very old speculation, of course. But whatever way you look at it, there are 4 male-female pairs thought to be forms of the god Thoth. And just to give you the names, there's Noon and Noonet. So you got the Noon, this idea, but then once you got there, it's got to have a female equivalent. So we add the female suffix, so we get Noonet, meaning the waters. We get Hu and Huhet, again, same principles, which encompasses the eternal flood. You get Ku and Kuket, which is darkness, male and female forms of darkness. Darkness was on the face of the deep and all this sort of stuff. And then finally you have Amun and Amunet, which means the hidden, in male and female forms. Interesting to emphasize the theoretical element of this, which is we're saying is a good thing. The speculations, very old speculations on philosophy that people did. There's an independent scholar called friend Umberto Campo Tumino, and is that this is almost like a binary system. Again, maybe you thought of that already, that the Chinese I Ching has these 8 diagrams, which are these a system of 2 lines, one broken and one unbroken, which, for want of a better word, yin and yang are 2 male and female abstract principles in the universe. And so the eightfold system, if you've got a permutations of a broken and unbroken line, then you can make 8 different sorry, you can make 4 different forms of it. So, and that's quite similar. So there's a whole speculation. The I Ching is a very, very ancient system. So people might have worked out that before. But certainly we know about the Chinese version. There's also a Hindu and a Buddhist version of exactly the same idea, which I discuss a little bit in my book Tantra Sadhana, where there's a dice oracle connected with us. And again, that's also interesting from the point of view of cosmology, the idea that there's a kind of random permutation element to it, that's casting of dice, which plays this amazing role, or gameplay, in especially the dice oracle in almost all of these ancient systems, that God plays a game with chance in a way, which is why the universe started as a chance event. So let's backtrack a little and talk about the male-female binary inherent in the above cosmology. To some extent, I said this is a metaphor based on the pair bonding that is fairly common in pretty much all societies, that sort of polarity. Sometimes it's extended or expanded, but at the heart there's this thing that the people form partnerships, or usually two of some sort. It always seems to be there behind the surface, and you can presume that certainly in ancient societies this was so obvious that people would have thought it is repeating an ancient pattern from the beginning of time, which perhaps it is. And even, it still works, even in current debates, obviously, on the nature of gender is very much part of our times, and people talk about a range of genders. There still seems to be a range between two basic poles. That idea always seems to underline everything. Even if you're negating it or expanding it or expanding it, those two ideas are usually behind the scenes. So the basic pattern of life is one of becoming two gender differentiated pairs. And that still makes a lot of sense to us, and it certainly made a lot of sense to the ancient Egyptians whose cosmology we're exploring. A good example of how this is very central, as people may not have thought about, is the use in the Egyptian language of two very common words. They usually have two words for everything. So for the concept of eternity, it was very much to do with cosmology, eternity. You have the word det, or which is the female noun, and then you have nehe, which is the male noun. So there are two, a male version of eternity and a female version of eternity that sort of interact with each other. This interaction between the twin poles, the male and the female, which is why I kind of think this is, I think of Egyptian culture as having this tantric undercurrent. Maybe it's not an undercurrent, it's fairly obvious sometimes. Okay, so looking for sources, I mentioned there are lots of different ways. This is just one way, but this model seems to be part of everybody else's model as well. They all play with this. So as a rich source of Egyptian cosmology, then you need to look at something like the coffin texts, which are quite extensive, and you tend to dip into specific bits of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of them, but there's also a kind of the Book of the Moon is pieced together from coffin text. You could always think that whoever owned that coffin or commissioned that coffin or bought that coffin made sure that it represented their personal view, their own cosmology, their own microcosm, how they saw the world, perhaps based on what they'd been taught and what they'd read or what they'd learned or whatever. And I suppose where better to put your own cosmology than on the coffin, so it's there to remind you, well, certainly it's like a statement of this is who I was and this is what I believed and what I think's happened to me now. This is my address. The oldest of the coffin text comes from the pyramid of King Teti, or I don't know if that's quite the oldest, but it's certainly one of the oldest. Or certainly it's probably the oldest coffin text, right? I think there are older pyramid texts, but his coffin it's the first one they found that has a kind of extensive text on it as well. So it's the oldest coffin text, and it also is part of the pyramid complex and the pyramid text from the 6th dynasty, so a long time ago, and it contains both a cosmology and a ritual. a ritual of reconstitution and manifestation. So that tells you what the purpose of a cosmology is about. It's there to help you with the process of remanifestation, if you like, which also means rebirth. Another interesting mythology from later times, not that much later, Middle Kingdom, is a thing called the Shu theology. Shu it might ring a bell as one of the ancestral or very oldest strata of gods, constructed from Coffin text 75 to 80. In this text, whoever wrote it, they made a distinction between cosmology and biogeny, i.e. cosmology being the creator god, a life god Atum, who was the creator of the world, or whoever it might be. It could be Amun as well, and gives it life and all the rest, starts things off. But the task of actually life-giving and developing all of that, naming it, if you like, and forming it to something, fell mainly to his two children, this golden couple again, the god Shu and his consort or counterpart Tefnut. And in this sort of capacity, Shu receives the name of life because he gives life, even though he doesn't technically start it off. Really, this is life for all intents and purposes. The other thing is very, very abstract principle, reading back. And he was called endless time, this word or eternity, Nehe. Whereas Tefnut, who is also called Mart, meaning truth or order, is given the name Det, which again is another form of eternity, which is invariable, permanent. So these are very subtle distinctions, male and female eternity, because they are the primary couple who actually give life to almost everything. As I say, at the atom bit, is pure priestly speculation in a way. So life, truth, and time were the energies that perpetuated the world as created by Atom. You could find this a lot later as well in the philosophy of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh of Egypt, who also knew quite a lot about this kind of theology stuff and added to it. He is always shown in this triad, which is a kind of another way of looking at it, of the one become two. In that case, you have the atom as this one principle, the visible sun, that in some ways gives life, but really it's Akhenaten and Nefertiti are shown below it as this couple, very like Shu and Tefnut, and they're the ones who actually do the work, right, of giving meaning and life to the world around them. Whereas one thing is very abstract, this is the reality, is the manifestations of this particular couple. So this theology, which again you won't read about very much in books, was an older strata of belief in Egypt. As I say, not widely known, and sometimes it's left out of books. But bearing in mind that, as I say, Atom or Ten always has these male and female attributes. Again, if you now, with that in mind, think about some of the other more well-known cosmologies of Egypt that people talk about a lot. You can see that really they're kind of variations on this basic underlying theme. That's the way I would look at it. That's the so-called Heliopolitan cosmology, named because it was popular in a place called Heliopolis. It adds another generation, that of the god Geb and the star goddess Nut, where essentially it's another golden couple. Although they're a little bit further abstracted. Well, maybe that makes it again more easy to understand when you're becoming more in the real world and some of the factors in there. Their manifestation, though, is troublesome from the Egyptian point of view, and perhaps that's what they're trying to explain, how the kind of glitches get into the system as things are reproduced down each generation, and errors perhaps get into the system, which is quite an interesting way of looking at things. So, for instance, the god Shu would be their father, the previous generation. He has to actually separate them at some point because they become so wrapped up in their own sexual bliss that they kind of forget about what their purpose in life, what they're supposed to do. And the world is that they're not really doing what their parents had done, if you like. So they have to be separated, and in which case they can divide and give birth to a multiplicity of things. And from it within the Heliopolitan model, which again there are a couple of different variations as time goes on. There are at least two variations. I say the earliest form of this would add a third generation of. In this time, you get two couples coming along, which again is a sort of is where you could get this sort of reproductive error, if you like. Mutation, it enables mutation. It's talking about mutation, but maybe mutation is necessary for the diversity in life. There has to be mutation on a basic underlying form of Shiva and Shakti. We're getting further and further away. And of course, this third generation has two couples, which is Osiris and Isis, and Seth and Nephthys. And of course, something in their existence leads to a certain amount of trouble or mutation, we could call it. Again, there's another famous schema, which is similar to the Heliopolitan one out of Memphis, which is an area probably in the vicinity of what is now Cairo, again, it's more in the substitution of who is the first mover, who is the first deity, and because the god Ptah, another very ancient creator, potter and a constructive fabricator god, he ends up as the top of the tree, if you like. But essentially what I'm saying is that behind all of these things is this pattern that's everybody's trying to make sense of, which is the primary couple that come, the one become two. And knowledge of this, which we might call the tantric secret, flows through actually all of Egyptian magic and philosophy in areas, and it is obviously an important thing to know about and to be part of your meditation. It gives you the key to how you become a creator yourself. And the primary thing to create is to recreate yourself, to remanifest yourself, to be reborn in another generation, which is the great Egyptian idea. Anyway, there's an exploration of the cosmologies of ancient Egypt. And with that, thank you for listening, and Seneb Tea.